Hello and welcome back to the FEZ Show. My name is Jack Giordmaina and we have a lot to get through today, as we should have already started the season by now, but we haven't due to the pandemic, which would put a question mark on the whole season and where we're going to be racing in Season 7. Formula E are set to announce where we'll be racing over the next couple of days, so we'll be talking about that very, very soon. Also, we have news of McLaren potentially joining the series in Season 9 for the Gen 3 era. We'll go into all the details about where they could be racing. Will they have their own team? Will they have to partner with a customer? All of that to talk about. Plus, Formula E have launched a new esports series with Formula E Electric, so we'll be talking all about that towards the end of the show. But joining me, as always, is the one and only Edward Hunter and Mr. Jack Pickering. Morning, boys.
Good morning. Happy New Year, Jack.
Happy New Year to everybody. Happy New Year, Ed.
Morning. Yeah, I'm excited about this Formula E Electric series. It's another new esports series that I haven't heard about that you've clearly haven't misspoke at all. So
I don't know what I said. I'm pretty sure I said Formula E Accelerate, but yeah, it's just a new esports series, which we'll see what happens with that. But boys, what I want to talk to you about, and I know Pico, you've been working a lot on this lately, is the calendar. We should right now have been doing a review of Santiago, looking back at the first double header, answering those questions that we had from testing, but it hasn't happened. We've still got another month to wait till February, when we go to Saudi Arabia for the start of the season. So we know we're racing in Saudi Arabia, but we have no idea where we're racing from now till the end of the season, really past Saudi Arabia. So where do you think we could be racing when Formula E announce it at the end of the month? What are you expecting to be on that calendar?
Well, we should have done about probably 5 FEZ shows from the start of the year to now because we would have had the first doubleheader of the season in Santiago. That hasn't been the case. We've had to wait for another month. However, we should be going racing at the end of February. Fingers crossed. In Diriyah, Formula E are enforcing that. And yeah, I think it will happen because Saudi Arabia, they will throw as much money at it as possible to make sure that the race does happen at the end of February. However, yeah, as you've said, I've been working a lot about this behind the scenes. I've been trying to look at alternatives, because the thing is, one thing that's happening is we can't really go during this pandemic to all these major cities in the world because of the pandemic. And so what I've been looking at is I've been looking at other circuits that could possibly fill the gap that could be made by losing all these races. There should be the full article out later this week on formulaezen.com. However, I've gone for one set in Europe, just to keep it closer to home for all the Formula E teams, most of which are based here in the UK, and a few not surprising ones at all, and also a few surprising ones. I'll let you in on a little secret. Valencia and Donington Park are on the list, to the surprise of literally 0 people.
Well, what I want to think, Ed, is obviously Jack's right. It's very unlikely, if we're looking at F1 with their street circuits, thinking that Monaco could go, Montreal could go, because they're street circuits. So the chances of us actually racing on street circuits in Rome, Paris, even London, with the XL Centre, even though it's like a inbuilt purpose track with no streets actually being used whatsoever, but going to these major cities, upholding where they've put COVID vaccine centres and stuff like that, it just doesn't seem viable. And Formula E's task over the last couple of months must have been incredibly difficult, and coming up with places and alternatives. And I don't know where Berlin is at the moment, but what if the Tempelhof airport is used for a vaccine place? That could rule out Tempelhof altogether, because it's a big place where the German government could decide that this is where we can set up our vaccine area, and then Berlin could be ruled out.
Yeah, well, there was an incident a few years ago where during I think it was the refugee crisis, where they were housing a lot of refugees at Tempelhof, and so Formula E had to move to a different location in Berlin to host a race in the middle of Karl Marx Alley in the city centre, which of course would still be out of bounds even if people hadn't voted against the race there. But anyway, I think like what you say, Pico has a very good point, that it's just not really a viable option necessarily to race in city centre. Obviously, it's going to differ country to country to some extent, but we also have the issue with, we saw it very recently with Santiago, travel bans. There was a new variant of COVID-19 UK. Santiago instituted a travel ban on all passengers and air flight coming in from the UK, which obviously is a big problem for all the UK-based Formula E teams. So yeah, it's really going to be quite tricky for Formula E logistically to find a way forward so they can actually hold the season. We know that holding 6 races in Berlin is not really a preferred option. They don't want to do that again if they don't have to. But like Pico says, basically Saudi Arabia, the local authority there that runs all the sporting events, have basically committed to hosting the this season opening doubleheader. So. And the other option, as I think Pico was also alluding to, is that where they held pre-season testing at Valencia, Circuit Ricardo Tormo, they basically have got that as their sort of plan B option to go back to. Well, that's one of the ones we do know about for sure that's in their contingency.
For me, though, it's like, what tracks, Jack, can they actually go to? Because if you think about Nürburgring, Silverstone, Catalonia, they're all massive tracks. Not really many areas for regeneration, which, you know, these Formula E cars need. And obviously, Formula E, they test at places like Calfat, and they test at places, I can't remember, there's a track in England that's just gone out, like Cadwell Park would probably be a good shout for a place where they test. And there's another track which it's gone out of my brain. Should have written it down, but I've forgotten it. It has green and it has green and white curbs, but anyway, that's all I can remember from that track at this precise moment. But they test around that track as well. You know, Formula E needs specific tracks to actually go and race on, and circuits that lend itself to be sort of helpful for a Formula E car. Because if you go to Silverstone, for example, if you go to Catalonia, Spa, Monza, I know Formula E wouldn't go to those places, but let's just put it in a hypothetical for right now. You know, they need to find a circuit that could actually suit Formula E cars.
Well, yeah, one thing that I have been looking at as well is one of my first things that I did was looked at what FIA grade Formula E circuits have to be. Now, they have to be grade 3 or higher, so there is a much bigger pool than what Formula One have to adhere to. So we can go to different circuits that we don't necessarily have to go to Nürburgring. I did consider Nürburgring, but that wasn't the German circuit I actually went for in the end. But yeah, there's a much wider field of being able to like what races, what countries, and which circuits they can race on. And yeah, I think Formula E do have this, they have this opportunity now. It's season 7, we're becoming a world championship this year. I reckon in the year that becoming a world championship, we've had some criticism in the past from fans saying that we race on these Mickey Mouse style tracks. So why don't we give it a go? The pandemic has given us this opportunity. Go for more traditional circuits for this season. See how it goes. Gain a couple fans. So if we do switch back to street circuits next season, they might tag along for the ride.
Ed, do you think that, you know, the tracks that we could go for, because there's loads of tracks that we could potentially go for that are not grade 1 listed, which would be Formula 1 like standard. You know, I'm thinking there's tracks in Finland, there's tracks in Sweden, there's tracks, you know, scattered around Europe. You know, the Bucharest Ring, for example, in Romania. You know, there's places around Europe, for example, which, you know, could hold a race and could be more Formula E friendly in terms of actual racing. And actually, rather than going to these well-known circuits and modifying these well-known circuits to make them more Formula E friendly, actually find a track, actually find a real traditional circuit that is actually could help Formula E grow. And actually, if we have this conversation of should Formula E be a mix of traditional and actual racing circuits, and, you know, we can expose that, you know what, there are actual racing circuits which give you a lot of braking, a lot of change of direction, a lot of undulations and changes like that.
Yeah, I guess the whole traditional versus street circuits debate is one we've been having even before it predates the pandemic, actually, that we in Formula E have been, as fans, I guess, have been having that kind of conversation, and there are a lot of people, especially casual fans, who really did like Pico was saying, just like sort of Mickey Mouse kind of layouts. Yeah, I've seen a couple of races at some of those layouts you were talking about, Jack, and for like GT cars, for instance, at Bucharest and Romania. Yeah, I think there's an argument going for like especially smaller tracks that maybe don't necessarily have the facilities, like tracks. There was a track in Finland, I think, that you guys were alluding to, which I don't think is hosted. I think it's hosted motorbike races, but not necessarily not many kind of open wheel car races, to my knowledge. But yeah, I'm not really sure quite where I stand on the traditional versus street circuit kind of debate. I think the cars are kind of designed for street circuits, designed to absorb sort of bumps. So if you can get some of those in there, that'd be nice. But I think in such a bizarre situation, the cars can sort of, I guess, run on traditional kind of billiard smooth sort of track surfaces that we find on some of these even the sort of lower grade circuits. So I think there could be sort of a compromise reach where you sort of end up having to put in some kind of weird Valencia testing style chicanes that are ridiculously narrow and just made of like tire barriers, just to make sure there's somewhere for the cars to regen on energy so they can actually make it to the end or in a timely manner. But yeah, it'd be I'd be interested to see what they do. I'm not sure if I've got a considered answer beyond that. Like,
yeah, but I was just thinking of the tracks in Finland that the names have come to my mind. So you've got the Kaimi Ring, which I think is hosting a Moto GP race. Was supposed to host a Moto GP race last year. I don't know if they did or not. And then you got please forgive my pronunciation. The Avienstio race circuit, which is also in Finland. Like I've seen those tracks before, and I know they could produce and especially the last one I said it's got a lot of high speed corners, a lot of braking zones. So I think it'd be quite cool to go to places that are traditional racing circuits but maybe haven't caught the public eye. But I think it'd be really interesting to see what Formula E do. Do they actually stick to this, street racing? They say no, we will go to Paris, we will go to Rome. It's just we're not going to put a date on it, and we're going to delay the season, because let's face it, we can delay the season. I don't think there is no reason for us to not delay the season and push it back and say, we don't have to finish in August. We really don't have to finish in August. There's no reason for us to finish in August. We can finish in October. We can finish in November, because we can start. And we can fit in a pre-season testing at any time, and we might alter the calendar slightly and how we go racing. But because this is a whole 2021 season, we don't really need to start next season at the end of 2021. We can start next season in 2022 in January, for example, or the end of January, or beginning of February, and maybe do testing late December or early January to make up for the and go a bit longer. So you could say, no, we are going to go and race in Rome and Paris and wherever, Korea and so forth, but we're just going to hold the plug. We've done our first race in February. There might not be another race till August, but we're just going to hold the plug, wait and see, and then rearrange a calendar when we actually can.
Well, yeah, that's what MotoGP did last year. Well, MotoGP couldn't actually get to Qatar, but they still had the Moto2 and the Moto3 races who were out testing at the time, and so those two races went ahead, and then they pressed pause, and then they restarted the season at Jerez in July. But yeah, I think with this opportunity, Formula E can just hit the pause button. They don't need to have a time frame. They could even just convert it to the 2021 season, then the 2022 season, and so on and so forth. But for Formula E have always wanted to run during the off season to get like more focus on the series, so it doesn't run parallel with F1 and with IndyCar and that kind of stuff. So it will go back at some point, but in the middle of this pandemic, I think it makes perfect sense to just stop and then just like figure it out after. We could return to street circuits. I think I do feel like we do have to have a season this year, and if it's still ongoing, when it gets to June or July, then yeah, I think they do have to properly consider just having a go on traditional circuits if they still want to continue with that ethos of staying on city streets.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to bring up, Ed. That's exactly what I wanted to bring up is, does this change Formula E's ethos? Formula E's ethos is, let's race on street circuits. We bring the people come to the racetrack, and in like the people, we bring the racing to the city. That's what I want to say. The people don't come to the racetrack. That's always been Formula E's philosophy. And if you start, going to these tracks which are not in city centres, which the people will have to trek to get to, or spend a couple of hours to find the place, to get to from the city centres where most people live, it goes against Formula E's philosophy. So do you think if we were to have a season which is mixed, some street races, some traditional races, do you think Formula E will go, right, season 8, back to all street circuits? Or do you think Formula E could go, you know what, it wasn't that bad? We don't know. We don't know how bad it will be yet. But let's be positive. Let's just say all runs swimmingly and smoothly. We go to about 3 or 4 real tracks and it was all okay. Nothing really major badly happened and everything's fine. Do Formula E go, you know what, we can open ourselves up to go to some traditional tracks? Or do Formula E go, right, we did it, but that's not us, so we go back to racing on the streets?
I think it's case-by-case basis, isn't it? Like you see something like Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez in Mexico City, which of course, obviously it's in the park in Mexico Central. It's sort of near the city centre in Mexico City, but there's a kind of, it's sort of a more of a traditional circuit. Of course, it's a different layout to the one that F1 used, but still, it's probably the most traditional circuit that we have, and I think it's one of the better races certainly that we have on the calendar. So I definitely see it's going to differ case by case if they go down that approach. And the other thing you were talking about there, it was very important, I think, is whether the fans are going to be there, which is sort of obviously a moot point if we've got a virus going around and it's not safe to have fans at the circuit. But I think for Formula E, it's very difficult for them. We saw in Berlin, they were really struggling in terms of they had, obviously it was a behind closed doors event, but they had a sort of event in I think it was in central Berlin that BMW were hosting, which basically where they would have people sort of watching the race on a big TV screen several miles outside the circuit. So it'd be interesting to see if Formula E can sort of replicate that kind of approach and keep the fans involved, even though if they can't actually be there in person via some weird sort of sponsor activation kind of thing. Because I think that could be quite difficult, because I wasn't sure if that thing that BMW did in Berlin was that big a success. I don't think many people went to it because it was sort of set up a bit kind of last minute. The people that did go, I think, said that they enjoyed a good time. So I think we'll have to see. Jury's kind of out on that one. But yeah, it's going to be not just a case of whether the fans can be there or not, depending on the virus situation. We know Saudi, I think Saudi said that they're having fans at the circuit because that was a big thing for them in terms of how they wanted to do it. So I do hope it's going to be safe there above all, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I want to move on now because we have news of potentially McLaren joining the series in Season 9 for Gen 3. Now, a lot of up in the air at the moment because obviously it's an option, so it may not happen. This may not happen. There is a potential that McLaren do not join Formula E in Season 9. I think honestly that's unlikely. They've been very interested. They've lost the battery tender, which meant they couldn't actually be in the series, but now that Williams have got it for Gen 3, that opens up the possibility of them actually racing in the series. But here's my question, Pico. My question is this: where do McLaren go? Okay, because let's say, for argument's sake, I expect Andretti, the Andretti Autosport team, to stay in Formula E despite losing BMW. Abt is a bit of a question mark, because obviously they were in before, the Audi sort of plug has been pulled. Do they stay? Do they go? Does that leave a gap open? If that does, that leaves a gap open for McLaren to take and have their own team. But let's say, for argument's sake, Abt stay. They say, no, you're not, we're going to stay, we're going to build our own powertrain with Schaeffler, we're happy to continue. Okay? And that still does actually work as some fallback for Audi, even though Audi have left the series. Audi could probably still get that technology, hilariously. But let's just say they stay. Then McLaren have to join the team. Do McLaren want to join the team and join a team like Andretti that's already established? Or do they want to have their own team, do you think? And if there isn't a chance for them to have their own team, do you think that's why they can pull their plug and say we're not actually going to join?
I think Andretti is going to be the obvious option. That's because they've had a partnership in the past. Zach Brown, who owns McLaren, and Michael Andretti, who runs the Andretti team, have a very good relationship. There was a little bit of a breakdown a few years ago, but that was mainly over Alonso. Alonso's out the picture now, and so and Honda aren't involved in Formula E. So I think that's fine from a McLaren and Andretti standpoint. So it would make sense. It would, and I could see McLaren making Andretti the factory McLaren team, but at the same time, I do think that McLaren will want to have their own team, which would mean that one of the teams would have to go. And I mean, like, we brought it up many times over the last 8 months or so that there is a rumor of teams leaving, but who knows? That might have been Audi or BMW, and that might have gone over my head. I've got no idea. But yeah, I think if McLaren do want to have a factory effort, I think they're going to have to appeal to Andretti to make them become the McLaren Andretti team for season 9.
Just to bring up that point there, so we said before that 3 teams were looking at investment. Obviously, one is gone because Venturi have brand new investors. So with that, you would assume now there's one team up for sale, who we don't know, but we know it's not. Obviously, like, we know it's not Neo because that's been confirmed to us. So, and then you've got one team who also wants investment. Who that is, also we don't know. But we've made assumptions in the past of who it could be. But obviously, I think Audi leaving and BMW leaving was separate to those teams who wanted investment and wanted to leave. But I have to agree with Pico. For me, if McLaren were to join, Andretti seems like, the smartest way to go. There has been that partnership before with the IndyCar, McLaren. I think even with the McLaren Shadow project, I think it's, there's some help from Autosport, the Andretti Autosport people there as well, I think. So I think that kind of makes sense, but at the same time I can see McLaren wanting maybe to do it by themselves, but I don't know if there's a need for McLaren to do it by themselves.
Well, I think there might be. Because it was interesting. If I look at the very end of McLaren's statement on their website, said basically, we're going to spend a whole year essentially sort of evaluating whether we're going to do it or not. It was a very odd sort of statement. The sort of you don't really expect. McLaren basically have signed an option for Gen 3 in season 9, so it's it feels like we could back out, but at the moment we're kind of interested. Seems to be the kind of tone that I got from it. Obviously there's so much that could happen. Season 8 is sort of gearing up to be a kind of weird sort of transitional season, because we've got Audi and BMW essentially leaving, and then we've got maybe McLaren coming in this season after, but we've sort of got that sort of holdover season in between, with season 7 being the last for BMW and Audi. So it's interesting because obviously the other question is what happens to a team like Virgin, who have got the Audi powertrain at the moment. Are they just going to carry on developing a sort of stock? What they're going to use for Gen 3 as their powertrain is a big question mark for them. So I guess if you're arguing that McLaren could partner up with Andretti, I think it's equally possible that Virgin Racing might be an option for them as well. As for, we don't know how many teams are actually going to sign up to Gen 3. We only know Mahindra is going to be there for sure at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see. There were a lot of rumours about Jaguar and Nissan evaluating their involvement continuing in the series, which I think could be interesting going forward. I sort of hope they stick around in some shape or form. We know Alpine and Lotus had an announcement of they were going to do a sort of partnership over several motorsport ventures, including, they mentioned Formula E in that. So it does make me wonder, with Renault, Alpine, Nissan all being owned by the same group, how that's going to shake out, essentially, whether we're going to have Nissan and Alpine fighting against each other in Formula E. That could be very interesting. But yeah, it was exciting to hear about McLaren interest at the very least, and a positive news story after so much was made of Audi and BMW leaving in such close proximity to one another.
Yeah, just to point out there, it's not Andretti actually who are currently running the McLaren team. It's the Schmidt-Peterson team.
Yeah, I think we were talking about the Indy
but,
entry from 2017.
But I think, before there has been some motorsport, but obviously the current entry is with the Schmidt-Peterson. So just to dial back any confusion from that. You make a really interesting point, which I want to just bring up with the Gen 3, because we've spoken to a couple of team principals about Gen 3, and finances, Jack, still seem to be the main sticking point, and for these teams, and a lot of work. They've got till March to sort of come to an agreement, but from team principals that we've spoken to at the moment, it seems like money is an issue in that return of investment. So what we would talk about in prior, what is the return of investment, which is very shady. Like, none of the team principals that we've spoken to wanted really to say, how much, they were losing or making, or if they were breaking even or what, right? You'd assume if they were making a profit, though, they'd tell you. But the fact that they're maybe not making a profit, or maybe don't want to tell you, may argue that, they're just about breaking even, or they are making a loss year on year. And I think maybe finances and the way that the sport moves forward, and it's from a marketing side, has become actually quite a major sticking point in these Gen 3 negotiations with these manufacturers.
Well, yeah, finance is always going to be an issue in motorsport. It always has been, and it always will be. Motorsport is tremendously expensive, and that's why you see pay drivers come in and into other series. Thankfully, we haven't seen that many. I don't think we've seen that many, if any, pay drivers in Formula E. But yeah, because it is a lot cheaper than other racing series that travel around the world annually. But yeah, it's finance will always be an issue, and so they will always look for ways for the sport to be cheaper. Now we know that there are going to be a few changes for when Gen 3 comes in. We know that testing is going to be down, which will send private testing, that is, not the 3-day pre-season test. So private testing, that's going to be cut down to 10 days instead of 15. And so yeah, it's and I think that's all about cutting costs as well. Yes, there's a competitive angle to that they won't be able to do as much running, but yeah, they to like hire out a track, do the testing and all that lot. That is all so expensive, and developing these powertrains as well. That comes into it as well. There's drivers' salaries and everything like that, and so yeah, it's still a very, very expensive sport. But yeah, they are working away. I don't think we'll see like a budget cap like Formula One will introduce from this or next year. But yeah, I do think that Formula E, they're doing okay budget wise, but they could be doing better.
There is some form of budget cap in Formula E. I remember speaking to teams, it's not like massively, but there is some sort of, you can't really spend more than this, but it's very limited obviously on what areas they can develop on, if that makes sense. So, and that's another thing that we spoke to the team principals. Are you happy with the roadmap? And they seem to be happy with the roadmap. Of the way that Formula E is intending to move forward, and they do think it is fast enough. But from the outside, it looks like it's not fast enough. But maybe I think when we spoke to those team principals that they're keeping their cards close to their chests on that one, and maybe that's part of the finances. Well, if we do this, it's going to get way too expensive. But if we don't do this, then there's no point in competing, if that makes sense. So, and I think there's one or two arguments there. So, boys, before we leave, because we're coming up to half-hour point, let's talk about Formula E's new esports series that have been launched. Ed, I know esports and e-racing, and that is a big part for you. So, what do you make of the Formula E Accelerate program? Because obviously, we had a week of qualifiers. Only 3 people could qualify, which I think put off a lot of people. Only having 3 people qualified. It looks like 12 Formula E drivers who were interested in obviously doing it, because the 12 ones that obviously were rubbish and didn't want to do it. Clearly, like, I don't want to waste my time doing this again. And we've got this is what interests me. You've got 12 drivers which are either chosen or, invited by Formula E, and like, who could that be? Are they going to be esports people? Are they going to be actual drivers from like younger series, maybe F3, F4, F2 even maybe, or World Touring Cars, WEC, who knows, right? But what was your take on the announcement of the Formula E Accelerate program?
Overall, I'm quite positive about it because I think it addresses a lot of the issues that I personally had with the previous attempt they did, which was the Race at Home Challenge. It's going to be 6 rounds, going from end of January through to March, I think, if I remember correctly, very early March. I think 5th of March is the grand final, which is it's again a double points thing, but I guess that's just to keep it sort of competitive at the very end. And like I said, I read it's going to be a sort of mix between professional esports drivers and the real life guys who are doing just a couple of rounds this time. I think they're doing 2 sort of exhibition races that sort of count towards the total team score, but it's not going to affect obviously the drivers' championship for the esports drivers, which is going to be the main focus this time around. Which, considering the difference in driver standards between the two, I think is probably going to be a net positive. I think it's going to be, in terms of the esports drivers, obviously they had the 3 the qualifiers were headed by Fredrik Rasmussen, and the 2 who finished just behind him are going to effectively join him in the sort of pool of available drivers for the teams. I have heard that there are going to be a couple of they're formally trying to get some influencers involved as well again. So I'm not sure exactly who they'll go for, because the last time they went for sort of a bit of a mix. They would sometimes go for like people who, like someone like Mike Channel, who was sort of very interested in motorsport and used to drive in it as well. I think real life Ginettas, I think he used to drive. But he was more of a presenter for a YouTube channel called Outside Xbox, and so he was like probably the beyond obviously the real life racing drivers involved, the next biggest influencer. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly what direction they'll go in that. But the big thing that I'm excited about really are the changes in the actual format. They're going to make the races 25 minutes long rather than just 15 laps long like they were before, and they're going to reintroduce, I think it was in the game already because I've seen Remco driving around with this on, but they're going to introduce energy management where the battery will drain down, you can lift and coast to regen into corners. That's going to become a factor, so there's a real danger of drivers running out of usable energy before they hit the finish line. And the other thing is they're going to add attack mode into the game, which I'm not sure, they've been working on it for at least a year since the end of Race at Home Challenge, so I'm hoping it won't be too buggy. And I think Studio 397 are usually very competent at making mods to their game, so I'm feeling optimistic we won't see like a buggy attack mode where someone drives over it and then they're able to basically use full power for the rest of the race. They'll only be for like however long it is. It's like a minute, isn't it, usually, or 2 minutes in Formula E. So yeah, it's going to be more realistic. There's going to be better driving standards. There'll still be Formula E drivers involved in a sort of, but only the ones that want to be there. So of the 12, you shouldn't get too many stragglers. And they've got rid of the silly elimination format too, which I think was a big negative on the Race Home Challenge. So yeah, I'm lots to be optimistic about.
One thing you said scared me, and you said influencers. And speaking
it's a dirty word, isn't it?
Congratulations, Jack, you made the cut.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I made the cut for an influencer, big time influencer. But no, what scared me about that was, and Pico will end on this, is last time we had influencers, and when we, you got top 3 qualifying, and then you're inviting people. You could be inviting some, your Brendan Lees or some real top esports drivers. But if you are, from the esport drivers that I've spoken to, and I've spoken to a couple, some of them were put off by only 3 people because they were like, well, if they're inviting, who are they inviting? And that means the racing, Ed says it could be clean, but if they invite influencers, the chances of the racing being clean is zilch, because these influencers will easily make mistakes, potentially. We've seen it in the F1 series. Some of them are good, but some of them obviously are not very quick and may make mistakes, especially in Formula E tracks where we'll be racing. And that put off a lot of influencers, a lot of esport racers from actually qualifying, because they thought, well, if whoever they're inviting, if they're not proper racing people, then the racing is just going to be atrocious. So I'm not even though there's £100,000 up for grabs in this competition shared out between the positions, that it actually might, they feel like, well, there's no chance of me winning it, because if I'm taken out by an influencer, that's it. What's he even doing here?
I didn't really understand that until Ed explained it there. So cheers, Ed. I understand it. I understand it a little bit more now. I'm very happy that they've got rid of the elimination format. It did feel like a modern day version of that qualifying format that F1 trialed a few years ago. But it's it depends on the influence, because I mean, like Mike Chan, I still don't really know who he is or anything like that. If they get then the thing, he wasn't like a big enough name to actually get involved. If you know, I think they can give Lando a nudge, because he did the IndyCar race last year. I think if they get Lando on board, then yeah, I think.
Well, that could happen with McLaren being interested.
Yeah, McLaren in Formula E. Yeah.
Well, the other thing I was thinking is they've got Rosenkrantz in the IndyCar team. So.
Yes, very true. I think with McLaren, Turvey Rosenkrantz in Formula E. Yes, but going back to Formula E Accelerate, it's going to be an interesting one. It does depend on what influence they get. I think they do need to be well known, because they didn't really do a good job of that last year. The only influencer that they got that I knew was Charlie Martin, and so I don't think they did I don't think they did a great job last year. However, it sounds a lot more promising compared to what they did last year, and so yeah, I will prefer it at least to what they did last year. But I mean, that's not hard to do. I didn't like Race at Home Challenge at all.
Fingers crossed then it is a bit better. So boys, thank you so much for joining me on the show. It was good to get our first one done of the new year, and hopefully there'll be many more in the future.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We're going to get familiar with this format and listening to each other once more for a whole year.
No more. Please, no more.
Please, no more. End the show now. Just end it. Just end it now.
Yes.
Just end it. Fine, I will. Thank you so much for watching the show, everybody on YouTube and on the podcast apps. Your continued support has always been amazing, and it's great to see that the channel is growing, that the podcast is growing. So we thank you all for listening. Please remember to come to our YouTube page. We've got some really great content hopefully coming soon. Hopefully, if we are allowed to go to the season, we'll hopefully have some better content there. We have got a Discord channel, so if you want to come join the Discord, it is in the links below. Thank you so much for watching the FEZ Show. We'll see you soon. Goodbye.